Welcome to Biblioccultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. In this episode, I'm going to go over a short little book called El Cid, God's Own Champion. But before I begin, please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. And doing these things really helps the channel out. So even if you just drop a heart in the comments, or if you just take the time to just do a small little click on the like button, it will really help the channel to spread and get other people to get engaged with the content that I'm doing here. And I really appreciate you following me, and I appreciate you engaging with the channel. Now, this book is in a category of what I would call modern hagiographies, in which you have important characters of a religious nature that are eulogized through short biographies. Usually these biographies that are sold in Catholic churches, and you find this in all religions really. These small biographies of their heroes, their saints, etc. And this kind of work stems from that tradition, but in particular within the Catholic tradition. And they have a lot of great books on historical figures that I've always actually enjoyed. There's something enjoyable about hagiographies simply because they're optimistic in a way. There is a structure to their narrative that is very close to a heroic epic. And I would say that in modern times, the tradition of the heroic epic is dead and gone, but you still find it in these small books. And in the ancient world, most biographies had this feel to them. So I do find it compelling that you still can find in the modern world small little books that still contain that spirit of heroic myth building. And I do believe that these are a positive thing. And it also allows you to merge into the stream of consciousness that these kinds of books bring to the table. So putting that aside as an introduction, El Cid, God's Own Champion. This edition is from 2008 from Catholic Vitality Publications, and it basically gives you a short biography of El Cid, whose full name was Rodrigo Diaz Vivar, whose honorific name was El Cid, which interestingly actually derives from an Arabic word, which is the Sayyid term, which does mean Lord. And interestingly enough, it is used even to this day in the Shia tradition to identify those that actually descend from their prophet. So very interesting, because you have a term that is given to one of the most famous Catholic heroes, and it's actually an Islamic term. I find that to be a quintessential dynamic of the Spanish experience that I think El Cid represents. Because in the identity of the Spanish consciousness, which is a reason that this book I think should be read, just because it will give you an insight into that. Personalities like Santiago, Pelagio, and El Cid Campeador are key components of the identity of the national consciousness of Spain, and as a derivative of all the Hispanic peoples because of the connection, obviously, to Spain, although it can be fairly argued that the identity of the Hispanic realm is influenced also by native components, African components, etc., depending on the region. So I'm not saying that the Hispanic experience is solely a Spanish one, but the Spanish one would be the primary one, the cement from which the other ones kind of adhere to. Thus why Spanish is the main language, and a lot of the basic Spanish religious traditions are the primary core of that identity. The book gives you the background to understand El Cid by going through some of the most important heroes of Catholic Spain, starting with Santiago, whose name in English would be Saint James, and Saint James being one of the 12 disciples. The legend goes that he went to Spain to preach, later on returned to Jerusalem, got martyred, being the first martyr of the disciples, and his body was taken back to Spain and buried, eventually ending up in the most famous church in Europe, at least when it comes to this topic, which is Santiago de Compostela, which is in northern Spain. And a lot of people know it because of the pilgrimage that goes to the Pyrenees and crosses from France, and it crosses into Spain, and that ends in the Church of Santiago de Compostela, which is very famous. So Spain, having one of the first martyrs and a disciple of Christ, is one of the key pivoting points of the identity of the Spanish peoples, because you do have different ethnic groups in the Iberian Peninsula, but it became, they kind of unified all these identities. Even to this day, I would argue that that's actually the case. So the background of the Spanish conquest is the Visigothic Empire. That's really the one that had all of Spain under its grip. The Visigoths, as some of you know, are Germanic peoples who first came into Italy and eventually ended up populating northern Spain, what you would call today the Catalan region. And obviously, eventually, all of Spain was highly influenced by this, and that's why a lot of Spanish surnames are actually Germanic surnames, like Rodriguez is actually a Germanic-derived last name. And in 714, Musa, son of Nusair, conquered Spain from the Visigoths, and it's actually considered an amazing military feat. The Romans were not able to do this, and many other peoples tried to do something of this nature, Hannibal, etc. But it was Musa, son of Nusair, who actually was able to achieve it, to conquer Spain for the Islamic Caliphate at the time. So this obviously becomes another important point in the history of Spain, because it changes the consciousness of the people, and it introduces a new culture, a new religion, a new perspective on the identity of what the Iberian people identify as their heroic avatar. And this phenomena leads to the apparition of the Virgin Mary at Covadonga, to Pelagio, which again is another very important character in the mindset in the history of Spain, who then decided to fight and begin a very long and arduous, centuries-long war with the Muslim invaders, which lasted a long time, and it created a very interesting dynamic in which you would have people fighting each other, then periods of peace, then periods of reconquest, and then periods of peace, etc. And this went on for a long, long time. Spain became quite chaotic in this process, because you would have all these regions fighting not only each other, but fighting for relics, Christian relics, and the Marian apparitions are a key component. The book mentions the Marian apparition, but just as a side note, the Marian apparition is a phenomenon that is seen all over Europe, in which, the Virgin Mary appears usually to children or to kings and gives them a warning, a prophecy, and usually a mission. And in the history of Spain in particular, Marian apparitions are a very big thing, as a lot of you probably already know. But in Spain, because of the invasion and because of the occupation and because of the struggle of the Christians with the Muslims, the Marian apparitions became quite militant. So that the focus of the apparitions was usually about fighting, about war. The Virgin Mary in Covadonga, for example, was holding a shield with a white cross on it, so that the militant component of these apparitions and the focus on sacrifice and death is very unique to the experience. And it has shaped forever the consciousness of the Spanish people and the Hispanic world. Even if you look at Mexico, you'll find the Virgin of Guadalupe, and that Virgin apparition is the locus of the Mexican identity, because she appeared to a mestizo boy in Mexico, creating thus the beginning of a particular identity that even though it's separate from the Spanish identity, at the same time, it is hybridized. Thus, the symbology of who she appears to in her own appearance, which is a huge debate, whether Mary herself showed up as an indigenous woman instead of the traditional European appearance that she holds in all the European apparitions. And this creates a big mess, because if it's truly the Virgin Mary who's appearing, she's not supposed to be a shapeshifter. So why is she changing her appearance to that point? She's supposed to be the very Virgin Mary in flesh and bone that was the mother of Jesus Christ. So if she's appearing in Japan and she's Japanese, and she appears in China, she's Chinese, and she appears in Africa, she's African, then she's not really the Virgin Mary, she's a shapeshifter of some kind. And if that's the case, you can imagine all the theological complications that derive from that. El Cid also, because of his struggles with his local kings, because he was very successful militarily, the book claims that he never lost a single battle, which could be possible, but again, we're dealing in a hagiographical kind of mindset, so it could be an exaggeration. Nonetheless, he was very successful militarily, and this obviously created a lot of jealousy among courtiers, and this then pushed El Cid to be most of his life bouncing around different lords in which he had to lend his abilities, including Muslim rulers, in which he was lend his sword to fight off even Christian kings, which in a way explains the difficult dynamics of the time and the cultural complications involved in it, because you have a highly devout Christian warrior basically lending his sword to a Muslim ruler to defend him, although the book makes it particularly clear that he refused to really fight Christian kings directly because he felt that this would be treason against Christians. But it is pretty clear, historically speaking, that he did fight Christian kings for the sake of Muslim rulers. So again, that gives you a texture of the situation. So in general, if you want to understand this person, his life, him as a warrior, as a hero, very devout Catholic, a true believer, if you will, and if you want to understand how men of this category were eulogized to the point of apotheosis, then this is a great little book to introduce you to him and to maybe guide you to other works that may give you a more historical, more academic perspective on the man. But again, I do enjoy these books because of their hero worship, epic nature that I think in a lot of works is missing unless you go into fictional works, because there in the novel format, it's open season on it and you can write however you want. But in the modern world, writing a book that is not strictly facts and figures, even if it has a particular ideological bent, but that still tries to justify itself with that kind of structure, is rare and therefore enjoyable. So whether you categorize it as fiction or you categorize it as history, it's up to you. But I think you should be familiar with El Cid, and sometimes it's good to read a very optimistic and epic hero-centered work. So thank you for joining me. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, and share the video and comment on the video. I greatly appreciate your support. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.